attracted you to the Adrian Dominican Order?
Well, I went to one of our academies for high school for 4 years, and then I went to Berry College, in those days, Berry College, for 1 year, and there was so much attractive about the community of women that I got to know in my education. Their dedication, their professionalism, their good humor, their awareness. They were not in any way stereotypic of some of the images that we have. And I was just very attracted. But then you always have to say, and it's a call. It is not just, oh yeah, this is something I want to do. It's, I'm called to do this. I have this deep feeling of being called into. Another reason, I never wanted to just do the ordinary thing, let me put it that way. I have nothing against marriage and family. My sister had 11 children, and I'm the youngest of 8, and I had no bad images, but I thought, that's not what I want to do with my life. I want to make a difference. And so call and life experience and this, I want to make a difference.
I sometimes wonder, with the number of sisters that I've interviewed now, how many would have entered the order if they had not gone to school with Adrian Dominican sisters. I think they play a big influence, maybe on younger, impressionable minds. You were older, I think, when you joined, but don't they say 5th grade is sort of, a time when they start thinking about this?
Well, I was taught by the Springfield Dominicans when I was in 5th grade, so I was taught by Dominicans all along. I don't know about that. I am aware, because I've been reading some of the histories of our deceased sisters, that many of them went to the academy, St. Joseph's Academy here on campus. Because one of their parents had died, or there was some disruption in the family. Now, that wasn't my case. My parents wanted me to have a Catholic education, and we did not have a Catholic high school in the town that I lived in. And I loved my years in boarding school. I really think young women being educated with women and not co-ed, they get a sense of who they are without trying to model themselves on what they think would be popular with their male colleagues. And I think that makes a very, very big difference.
Hasn't that been borne out by studies that teachers, whether or not it's intentional in co-ed classes, have a tendency to favor the boys because they're going to be the breadwinners? I mean, maybe not so much today, but certainly not that long ago.
Not that long ago. And I'm still would wonder, whether the girls get equal attention. But the other thing is you're not distracted. When you're an adolescent, what do you want? You want a boyfriend, or I don't know what boys want, but and you want to be attractive, and well, when you're in an all-girl environment, what do you want? You want to achieve. So I'm a big fan of
separate education.
Separate education. For
So,
girls particularly.
Yes, yes. Of course, I mean, those have to be separate education for boys, but anyway.
Yeah.
You went to Berry, you were only there for 1 year as a student.
Right.
But 1 year, and what year was that, and what did you think of it?
Well, that was early in Berry's years. That was early in the 50s. I think I went there in 1951.
All-girls Catholic school?
All-girls Catholic college. Actually, I was offered a scholarship to Siena Heights here, but I didn't want to come to Adrian, Michigan. And Florida sounded a lot more romantic and everything else to my adolescent mind. So Barry did not offer me the scholarship, but that was not an issue with my parents, thank God. So I went to...
What was the campus like? Describe that year. What did it look like? What did it feel like?
Well, the entrance looked just exactly like, you know, the Royal Palms and the chapel and the circular drive now, I'm talking about. And then the administration building was over to the right. And that was a long white L-shaped building with the library at the far end. On the left, there were two smaller buildings, and they were dorms. Then between these two, let's see, what were they called?
They've changed their names, I think.
Yeah.
Thanks to donors.
Yeah. It might come back. And then between those two dorms, you walk through, and there was the swimming pool, which was a small swimming pool. Do they still have the swimming pool? Okay. Yes. And then I lived in Stella Matutina, which was the big white building on the other side of the swimming pool. I think it's because of Barry that I eventually became a carrier of melanoma because I was a literature major. So I used to get in a tube with the books that I had to read and float around the pool in the burning Florida sun. I stayed cool because I was submerged in water, but years later I carry melanoma, and I still think it goes back to those days.
Well, and also you'd come from Chicago.
Yeah.
So this was a treat.
Yeah, absolutely. Although I came from a small town that had a lake.
Oh.
So
But it didn't have the sun or the warmth.
No.
Yeah. And all right, so that's and what were it was all girls then?
All girls.
Catholic girls. Wasn't mostly?
Mostly.
And you were inspected. Was that they were still inspecting you? No sleeveless dresses. They were.
And always nylons when you went to Mass on Sunday. And one of the clear memories I have is I had seamless nylons were coming in at that time. And I had seamless nylons on. And I was standing in line because we used to march in. And all of a sudden I felt this hand run up the back of my leg. And I jumped. And it was one of the nuns checking whether or not I had nylons on, because she didn't see a seam.
Barry's come a long way
yes.
Since those days. It's a completely transformative college environment now.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And we'll go in order. So you were there, and then why did you only stay there for 1 year?
Because I entered the community.
Okay.
And then after I went through formation and made my first vows, I was sent back to Florida to teach. And I taught in Our Lady of Lourdes in Melbourne, Florida, and St. Anastasia's, and Thomas Aquinas High School in Fort Lauderdale. So in the summer, I went back to Barry and completed my bachelor's degree. So all of my degrees, my undergraduate degrees, were at Barry.
Wait, you were teaching without a BA? How'd that happen?
It happened all the time.
Makes me feel better that I don't have my PhD, Dr. Dean. Okay, so you came back then to Barry for your BA.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then Florida State for my MA and my PhD.
So you saw a change in those ensuing years. When you came back then the second time, how had the campus changed? How was it different?
Well, I was only there during the summer school. And
there were men there, though, I think, during the summer, weren't there?
Only in the graduate department. I think towards my latter years, they opened up the graduate school in education, and there were men there, but not in the undergraduate.
When you came back and taught English, how had the campus changed?
Well, let me think that through a little bit. because I came back to teach at Berry in the early 70s, late 60s.
So there would have been male students, and it would have been integrated?
Oh, yeah, I think so, yeah. And we also, there was also a growing population of people from the Caribbean, students from the Caribbean.
And so when I say Berry to you, what other than your seamless stockings, what other stories, what else do you think of when you think of Berry, for example, when you were teaching there, for example?
Well,
what you liked, what you didn't like, just what has left an impression on you.
I came back, when I came back to teach at Berry, I had been at Florida State University, and I had become engaged with the whole women's agenda. And when I went back to Berry, they were still having a Miss America or a Miss Florida contest and using the auditorium. So I first went to the faculty senate and raised my concerns that I thought it was totally inappropriate that a woman's school was having a Miss Florida contest. And that kind of like, well, where are you coming from? What planet are you off of? So I kind of arranged a small boycott of students to stand around and complain about it. And I think that was the last year they rented it. Basically, what they rented was the auditorium for the. That was one thing. I also introduced women's studies courses. Let's see, what else? I think I did mostly it was trying to get the college, which was still a woman's college, except for its graduate program in education, to recognize.
It was still a women's college when you were there teaching? I thought by then it would have had, I'm sorry again, when were you teaching there?
Late 60s.
And they still had men only in the graduate program?
I think so. Otherwise, why would I have been?
Yeah. But it was integrated. I mean, it wasn't at least all Catholic girls, and they weren't all white.
Right.
And I'm sure there had to be Hispanic students there and Caribbean.
You're right. They did. But
how were you perceived then? Were you perceived as sort of a radical?
Yes. Now I'm no longer perceived as a radical because of the things I was doing then. I just take it for granted now. But yes, they were like, what planet has she dropped in on us from?
Were they nervous? Wait, we just hired this teacher here, and look at she's causing problems, she's stirring up trouble? Or were they, yeah, you know what, she's got a point?
Both. I don't think I was totally obnoxious. I think I was just determined. And I shared an office with a woman who subsequently left the congregation, but she and I were on the same wavelength, and so anyway, that was when I first got. But see, then I only stayed at Berry for 3 years, and then I was elected a provincial in my community, which took me out of education for 6 years. And because of the work I did in that period of 6 years, I really was not interested in going back and teaching in college. And that's when I went into international work at the Center of Concern.
In Washington, D.C. Tell me about that.
Well, while I was a provincial, it was in 1976, there was the Bishop's Bicentennial. And summers were not very busy, and the man that was in charge of the Bishop's Bicentennial happened to have been a student I taught in 4th grade. And I had gone, when I was in Washington, I had gone in to see him to say that, you know, Florida didn't even know that there was a bicentennial, and what was he doing? So then, in this process of the conversation, I had told him that I was an Adrian Dominican. He said, you know, they taught me in grade school. I said, oh, they did? And he said, yeah. He said, I've lost track of my 4th grade teacher, and it was...
Did you recognize him?
No, oh, I mean, he was a grown adult.
And he didn't recognize you?
No, because by then I had, my full name is Sister Maria Amabilis Riley, but that I dropped, well, when I went to Florida State University, the computer dropped the Amabilis, and I became Sister Maria Riley, and I liked it so much better.
Is that an Irish?
No, it's Latin. It's part of the litany, and it means most amiable. And so I remember when I taught in grade school, the little children called me Sister Annapolis because they couldn't get it out. And then I remember this one very smart little, I think it was a little boy, said, now did they name you that because you are amiable or because they hoped you'd become? I said, you tell me. So.
And so you have spent many years then in Washington, D.C. working on behalf of the women's movement.
Right. At the Center of Concern, I was the director of the Global Women's Project.
And are you heartened by all the gains that women have made over the years?
I am heartened and disheartened. I am heartened at the raised consciousness. I'm disheartened that women are not changing the system very much. They're, at least the generation that has matured in recent years, are just, it's how do you make it in this system? Whereas in the years that I was really active, it was how do we change the system? And
so the women getting the recognition now are the CEOs of Yahoo or Facebook women, but not the women that are making masterful changes.
Right. Right.
And what do you attribute that to?
The culture. I mean, we have a culture of achievement and a culture of, and achievement is measured by how much money you make and what kind of positions you hold, not whether or not it's a more equal culture. I mean, not whether it's a more equal environment.
People will say, well, you know, but you chose to be a sister. It wasn't exactly a vow of poverty, but sure, just because you may not be interested in that.
Well, but I worked with people like Bella Abzug and, you know, who did not have a vow of poverty and did not have, I mean, she was a lawyer. I love the story that she was one of the defense lawyers on a case, and when she got to the courthouse, she sat outside waiting, and they wouldn't let her in the courtroom, and because she was very early woman lawyer, so she went home and she was so upset, and her husband said, well, I think you need to start making yourself stand out more, so start wearing hats. And you know, she became famous for her hats. And so I worked with some very, very powerful women at the UN. And
how did you get on the board of trustees then at Berry, since you'd really left the teaching cycle?
Well, I was actually put on the board at Berry when I was in the latter years of getting my PhD at Florida State. And I did go into teaching for a couple of years. And then there was a little bit of conflict of interest because once Berry hired me, they wanted me off the board. Then the president wanted me off the board. And I said no, you know, because the position I had on the board, I worked with, at that point, Linda Bevilacqua, who did the student life, you
Dean
know.
of students?
Yes, she was Dean of Students. And I was her board liaison. And Linda was trying to bring in some modern ideas and needed all the help she could get. And so I didn't want to get off the board because I knew that, you know, we were on an agenda that needed to happen. And so I remember when the president called me in and she said she wanted me off the board because I was on the faculty. And I said, well, if I can't be on both, I think I'll choose to resign from the faculty. Well, she didn't want that either, so she left me alone.
So you and Linda go back?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
She was just probably right out of graduate school, too, and was Dean of Students, and trying to bring some modernity into the way students were treated at Berry.
And at that time, was there that was a bit of a struggle?
Oh, yeah, it was pretty traditional.
Who was the president?
Dorothy Brown?
Sister?
Oh, yeah.
So that was sort of the new young Turk Catholic sister versus the older school Catholic sister.
Mm-hmm.
Think. You are, or Berry and other Catholic universities, of course, are entering an interesting time now with the diminishing number of sisters. And I say that specifically because Berry is so associated. It's always has had a sister as president. Of course, there's one now next door at Siena Heights, too. But how do you see, then, the future of the Dominican mission with the likelihood that there will be very few, if any, sisters in the school? And perhaps, in this case, Sister Linda Bevilacqua might be the last sister for some time being there.
Well, I think the choice of Board of Trustees is very, very important in this kind of environment because they are responsible for the mission of the institution. It's not just the sisters. And so I think the choice of board members is a critical question.
They are looking to lay leadership, probably, in the coming future, which doesn't necessarily mean board members, but it looks as though the associates are the ones that are, for lack of a better word, being groomed, you know, in some cases take over. Is that a good thing, or is there something going to be missing without the presence of a Dominican sister?
Well, I think our associate program is very important, and our associates are trained in Dominican values and lifestyle, and not vowed, and I'm in favor of calling forth their leadership because we're getting older, and we're not getting new members like we used to. I think there's a reason for that. I think historically, lay women now are able to get theological and pastoral training, and when they have the training to go into parishes and do the work that before we did. And so more and more kind of a niche, well, we've had several niches that have disappeared. The Catholic school system is much diminished. And then that was a niche for us to be parish associates, et cetera, but now, you know, we have lay women perfectly capable, and so it's just the changing times.
But some aren't even Catholic.
Well, that's the pastor's issue, not ours. And our associate program, I think, is.
Well, let me go back to that. So what you're saying is, had perhaps they been more open and given women, sisters, a bigger role in the church, that might have made a difference?
I don't know that I can draw that conclusion. I can just look at what's happening now. it's, you know, it's women in the church is the kind of fundamental. But then, had they made
Well,
more?
I'm thinking of the Catholic Church.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, and no women priests.
Well, you know, I think it's more the rise of the laity in the church, and particularly women who cannot be ordained, went for the theology and the pastoral, so they work in parishes and they're very successful in parishes. The only thing they cannot do is the sacramental life of the parish. So in some ways, the very fact that women have been excluded from the priesthood has given them a whole other arena of leadership.
And does that perhaps also because they're a little more facile, as you mentioned before, when Sister Linda was trying to sort of modernize things and there was resistance, is this lay leadership maybe going to be able to go places that a more traditional leadership of vowed sisters might not have gone?
Well, yeah, but it's hard to, there's that, well, in the Adrian community there aren't very many traditional sisters. So, but in some communities there are. So, you know, it has to be looked at case by case.
Is that the attraction for many women to the Adrian, that it's not, and it's not what many people might think of as a traditional nun,
right,
you know, in prayer, deep in thought, contemplation, but that it's a much more out there, involved.
Yeah. In fact, that we're having this conversation is wonderful because we have a young woman from Columbia here. Her Erica, have you run into Erica?
No.
Well, she's here on a 2-month kind of come and see. And she's not a candidate yet, but she is very interested in joining a community. But she wants to be very sure that the community she joins, and I had lunch with her today, she's utterly delightful, totally extroverted, is not a pious community, but it's a community engaged in the lives of people. So if you get a chance, you can ask somebody if you can talk to Erica.
Does she have very long dark hair?
Yes.
Thick?
Yes.
And she has a Hispanic accent.
Oh, very, very thick.
I passed her, and I just happened to look and probably noticed her because she's so, what, in her 20s, maybe early 20s?
Late 20s, I would think.
Okay.
I don't know, but I would think maybe late 20s. But, I mean, this was her. Now, when we changed after the Second Vatican Council, I know one of my brothers didn't like it. He said, because the mystery is gone. I said, you mean whether or not we had ears? You know,
if we had a ponytail or short hair?
Yeah. So anyway, that.
So you're very positive then, at least, you know, reasonably speaking, you're positive about the future.
Well, you know, I would like to see more new members, but if that's not in the books, then the thing that I talk about is we ought to be thinking about midwifing some new forms of women being engaged in church ministry. For example, many of the women who are trained in pastoral work and in theology are in parishes, but kind of isolated. They get hired by the pastor, but they don't have much of a support community. And so what about organizing or helping them to organize women like themselves who are in pastoral ministry in parishes as a kind of new form of community? I mean, things like that. Looking at where is the future life of the church emerging, and how can we midwife that?